The history of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link is legendary for its controversy.
This game gets a bad rap.
Really? That's a bad game?
The least popular Legend of Zelda game, and that was Zelda 2.
I thought it was pretty good. I mean, look at it, it's gold.
You came 1,000 miles just for this game?
Let's take a journey as to why Zelda 2's creator Shigeru Miyamoto considers it the closest he's ever come to a failure. Look at what went wrong in the game's development, the games that influenced it, why the game was made by an entirely different team than the first game, see why Zelda 2 was delayed several times before the US release. There's a reason Nintendo says, but critics believe there was a more sinister reason. We'll compare each version of the game and see what Nintendo censored from American players. Why the original console it came out on ultimately failed. We'll see why one of Zelda 2's directors would never make another Zelda game ever again. Plus, find out what caused the game to become the hardest Zelda game of all time to beat.
I'm in the 6th Palace of Hyrule. You're losing it, Pop. Yeah!
Break down Zelda 2's strange story, where it fits on the timeline, and how it's changed over the years. Take a deep dive into its cancelled sequel, and how it went on to influence Ocarina of Time. And take a look if the movie Legend had any influence on the Zelda series at all.
We are already one.
I'm Kevin, and this is the history of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, and why Nintendo never made another Zelda game like it ever again. Go.
But we wanted to create a separate game.
The foundation of action games at the time was to feel difficult for everyone.
You feel like you're watching things happen rather than achieving them yourself.
I think the development time for Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link was on the long side for games at the time.
Zelda 2 was sort of a failure.
The original Legend of Zelda was a hit in America.
Super Mario Bros., Kid Icarus, and Metroid are among Nintendo's biggest sellers, but so far, none has surpassed Zelda in popularity.
The original Legend of Zelda wound up selling over 1 million copies in just 6 months. One retail salesman of the time had this to say about Zelda: "I haven't sold this many of a single title for any system since the Pac-Man craze in 1982. There was even one popular report where a young man and his 2 friends got together every Thursday night for a Zelda party, where they would order a large pizza, drink beer, and play Zelda just because they loved the game that much. Today, a scene like this might not seem so strange, but back in 1987, a bunch of adult guys getting together to play video games was mind-blowing to people. Video games were for kids. Naturally, though, with the hype and popularity of The Legend of Zelda, they would be hyped for a sequel. But in a time where no one really had a connection to an internet, little did they know that Zelda 2 was actually already out in Japan. And it came out even before Zelda 1 came out in the US. Oh, here comes the rewind. The original Legend of Zelda was a hit in Japan, where it sold 1 million copies on its first day of release in early 1986. But, and this is a big but, in Japan to play Zelda you had to buy an add-on to your Famicom, Japan's version of the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES. This add-on to the console was the infamous Famicom Disk System, promoted as an upgrade to the original cartridge-based Famicom games. This new disc-based system allowed for games to have more memory, better sound, and best of all, you could save your game. Zelda was a launch title for the system, showing off all these hot new features. Nintendo's plan was to start moving all their games to the disk system, and Zelda 2 would be no different. One would think that the obvious choice for a sequel would be to make a bigger, more epic Zelda in the same vein as the original. No, Zelda 2 was going to be way way different. So, what happened? The original Zelda team did an outstanding job on the first game, so why not bring them back? Well, there was one problem.
It's me, Mario!
Yes, Mario. Created by the same team as Zelda, and at the same time. You can watch my full video on the full history of The Legend of Zelda for all the juicy details on that story. Super Mario Bros. Like Zelda was crushing it on the sales charts, quickly becoming the mascot of Nintendo. Super Mario Bros. Though was on a cartridge, and with the new Famicom Disk System add-on, it would be in Nintendo's best interest to get a Mario game on a disc to entice more Japanese players to buy an FDS. This put most of the original Zelda team on Super Mario Bros. 2. Zelda's creator and director Shigeru Miyamoto would take up more of a producer role at this point, overseeing and managing everything in his group, known as Research and Development Team 4, or R&D 4 for short. At this time, Miyamoto would assign new and upcoming developers to a variety of new projects and sequels, starting with Zelda 1's co-director Takashi Tezuka.
Zelda はそっかごめんなさい。Zelda は宮本さん、最初の Zelda 宮本さん。
Oh, excuse me. Zelda 1's assistant director. After Zelda 1, Tezuka was put by Miyamoto in the director's chair for Super Mario Bros. 2, which they would release on the FDS only a mere 4 months after Zelda 1. Known as the Lost Levels in America, immediately following this, Tezuka would go on to making Super Mario Bros. 3, where he'd be stuck in Mario development hell for the next 2 years.
Oh no!
And so the guy who was Miyamoto's right-hand man in creating Zelda, and he even designed the hero Link, would not be involved in the gameplay design of Zelda 2. Miyamoto would have to build a new team for the next Zelda game. Toshihiko Nakago would still remain as head programmer for the game. The mysterious Maru Maru from Zelda 1 also returned as a programmer. Maru Maru is possibly Tatsuo Nishiyama, based off evidence from other games. 3 new programmers were added along with a designer, Kazunobu Shimizu. In the first game, designer credit went to Takashi Tezuka, and we know what he said his job was.
最初の Zelda 宮本。
So we can presume that Shimizu probably had the same duties. Miyamoto had become a very busy man at this time at Nintendo, and also welcomed his first child into the world. Zelda 2 started with a concept Miyamoto came up with for an action game that would utilize high and low movement in attack and defense, as well as upward and downward strikes. To develop this new concept, Miyamoto appointed Tadashi Sugiyama. He was a graphic designer at Nintendo starting in 1983, where he designed the characters Popo and Nana in Ice Climbers, while also having worked on Baseball and Clue Clue Land. Sugiyama would not be alone in this endeavor though. His partner, Yasuhisa Yamamura, another graphic designer hired in 1985, whose only credit at the time was for the work he did on the game Soccer. This would be their chance to prove themselves in front of master game designer Miyamoto. Even though the FDS was a worthy upgrade from the Famicom, it was anything but a guaranteed success. Nintendo may have been #1 in video games across Japan, but competition was rising, from the personal computer game market to other consoles such as Sega's Mark III. Another problem was Nintendo had been allowing third-party companies to make games for the Famicom, which led to pushback from fans and critics saying that the quality of Famicom games had gone down, claiming third-party game makers were just pushing out low-quality games for a quick cash grab. So Miyamoto and his new crew had the monumental task of maintaining Nintendo's level of quality and recreating the success of the first Zelda, leaving Zelda 2 in the hands of 2 rookie game directors to make a sequel, nothing like the game that came before it. Rolling along in 1986, Shigeru Miyamoto and the new team began work on the soon-to-be Zelda 2 game. Miyamoto's focus? Gameplay? First.
It was my idea, but the actual game was developed by another team. Different people to those that made the first game. Compared to Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2 went exactly what we expected. All games I make usually gets better in the development process, since good ideas keep coming, but Zelda 2 was sort of a failure. Shigeru Miyamoto.
The two new game directors, Tadashi Sugiyama and Yasuhisa Yamamura, went to experiment and develop further Miyamoto's new game concept. At Nintendo, new games began development with a small team, then expanded once the core gameplay was ready. The story and characters would be figured out later.
Development started with Mr. Miyamoto saying he wanted to make a side-scrolling action game that made use of up and down movements for attacks and defense. It's rooted in actions like jump strikes, downward strikes, and high and low shield defense moves, types of moves that weren't possible in the first game. Rather than being a continuation of the series, it started as a new sword and shield type of action game. We were experimenting while producing the game, so we didn't really have the first game systems in mind while developing it. Tadashi Sugiyama.
Much of what Miyamoto's R&D4 team was working on at the time was heavily focused on side-scrolling action. Their other projects included the next Super Mario Bros. And another platformer, like Mario, but in the vertical. And Zelda 2 would be no different. The first game's hero, Link, this time around would have very dynamic movement. Miyamoto bringing his expertise from Super Mario Bros. And Donkey Kong to guide the two rookie directors, Sugiyama and Yamamura, in the right direction.
What we wanted to do with The Adventure of Link was really focus on the action. Whereas Zelda is a game where the player learns and grows, and that's how you complete the game. The Adventure of Link is all about the action. Obviously, the player can polish their action and become better at it, but we wanted to create a separate game. Shigeru Miyamoto.
The high and low fighting for Zelda 2 seems to take inspiration from the arcade game Kung Fu Master. Miyamoto directed the conversion of Kung Fu Master to the Famicom, renamed Spartan X, on the Famicom, and just mere Kung Fu in the US. Kung Fu had high and low attacks to defeat a constant onslaught of enemies. You could also jump kick, to feel like an extra kick-ass martial artist. The game comes from the mind of famous game designer Takashi Nishiyama, but it would be Nishiyama's next game that would show us the next piece of Zelda 2's origins. Trojan. Wielding a sword and shield, you again are submitted to a constant barrage of enemies, missiles, bombs, and so much more. Luckily, your shield can block high, low, and upwards. Sword attacks could only be dished out from high and low. It's a game that rewards skill and lightning-quick reflexes. Watch a player who's good at Trojan and it's like watching poetry in motion. Then watch a first-time player, like me, well, it ain't pretty. And kind of embarrassing. Miyamoto's concept in some ways flips Trojan's style of combat. Instead of the shield blocking upwards, you attack upwards. The more revolutionary, though, is the downward strike, which appears to be taken from the game Dragon Buster. That has its own downward strike, as its influence would carry on to many games down the line. You'd be fighting these battles in Zelda 2 over and over again, so director Sugiyama knew you needed some incentive to keep fighting. For games like Trojan, their high difficulty and combat was built for the arcades, to get you to keep popping in coins to the machine at a constant rate. But for home consoles like the Famicom, there needed to be more, because you'd be at home, playing for longer. This would lead to the next logical step of making some sort of progression system for the game. 4 months after the first Zelda released, came a game that would create a phenomenon in Japan, unlike anyone had ever seen. Dragon Quest, a fantasy role-playing game taking inspiration from classic Western computer RPGs, like Ultima and Wizardry. Character stats, experience points, turn-based combat, item management, towns, and dungeons to explore. Japanese players had never seen anything like it. An RPG for the mainstream. RPGs back then were almost entirely limited to personal computers, and with their high price tag, most Japanese homes didn't own one. The original tabletop role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons wasn't even translated and brought to Japan until 1985, so the entire concept of an RPG was still very new to the Japanese in 1986. Oddly enough, Dragon Quest had all the things Miyamoto avoided putting into the first Legend of Zelda. Miyamoto disliked the constant use of menus in RPGs, its over-reliance on dialogue, a high learning curve, and numerous stats to keep track of. Miyamoto always pushed for what he called a live game, where all your actions were on screen and you actively performed them. where Dragon Quest had you pick commands from a menu, like open a door or take the stairs.
I personally have a fundamental dislike of the RPG system, but there are so many people who do like it, and there are certain types of games for which that system is perfectly suited. I think that with an RPG you are completely bound hand and foot and can't move. But gradually you become able to move your hands and legs, you become slightly untied, and in the end, you feel powerful. So what you get out of an RPG is a feeling of happiness. But I don't think there's something that's fundamentally fun to play. Shigeru Miyamoto.
What Miyamoto could not deny was the growing popularity of Dragon Quest in Japan. Kids may have run to the theater to see films like Studio Ghibli's Castle in the Sky, also out that year in 1986, but then run back home to kill more slimes and level up in Dragon Quest. The success of Dragon Quest showed that a traditional RPG could work on a home console, and with the general awareness of RPGs becoming more prevalent in Japan, this might have opened Miyamoto up to the idea that RPG systems could be useful. If you can't beat them, use them. Miyamoto was still going to avoid using all those damn menus though, and keep the action gameplay on screen. Well, as much as possible. There was still going to be one menu, but no sub-menus. The typical RPG level up format. Fight battles, gain experience points, to eventually level up, then some or all of your stats increase. Miyamoto never liked seeing these dozens of stats. He always pushed to simplify and make it as easy to understand as possible. So for Zelda 2, you gain experience points from defeating enemies, but you only have 3 stats and you get to choose which one of these you're gonna increase: attack, magic, or life. Attack is the most obvious, being how much damage you do on hit to an enemy. Magic reduces the cost of spells. Life, though, is a bit misleading. The instruction manual describes the life stat as defense power. It's like adding armor, but you're still in a green tunic. To increase the life meter, though, you have to find heart containers scattered throughout the world. The magic meter works pretty much the same. The magic stat will cut the cost of spells, and then you can increase the magic meter by finding magic containers hidden across the land, and that will give you more magic points to spend on spells. This was the first appearance of the magic meter, and it would go on to many future Zelda games. The life meter, on the other hand, would end its life with Zelda 2. Pun intended. While early computer RPGs in Japan and in America used hit points for how much damage you could take before
Game over, man!
And platformers only allowed for 1 or a few hits before
Game over!
The third option was the life meter. Action games where you were likely to take a lot of hits, the life meter became the trendy thing to use. First seen in the 1984 arcade game Dragon Buster, which Zelda 2 takes a lot of inspiration from. Dragon Buster was a side-scrolling dungeon crawler. The battles were tough, and you were commonly gonna take a bunch of damage. Called the Vitality Meter in Dragon Buster, allowed you to absorb more of a beating and enabled enemies to hit for different amounts of damage. So Nintendo decided to keep with the trend and build in a life meter for Zelda 2. Dungeons this time, and only this time, would be called palaces. These huge palaces would be multi-level labyrinths. Zelda 1's dungeons hid a map and a compass you could find to help you traverse the maze-like dungeons easier. The palaces would have no such items. You were going to have to memorize it or draw a map. Drawing your own map was not unheard of in the 80s. Other action platformer NES games of the time, like Metroid and Castlevania, didn't have maps either. Later palaces in Zelda 2 would become more big and complex, and have more than a few dead ends. Sometimes you'll be fighting your way through only to discover nothing but a wall. Your only reward being more experience points, and now you know which way not to go. The boomerang, bombs, arrows, magic wand, in fact, almost all the useful items from the first game are gone, because the focus was on the action. So instead, there would be powerful upgrades in the form of magic spells, even though Miyamoto's dislike of magic is well known.
It's not that I dislike it, you see, I just think relying on magic is taking the easy way out somehow. Shigeru Miyamoto.
Well, then I guess they took the easy way out, because there's plenty of spells to use in the game. These spells will give Link special powers, like the shield spell to increase your defense, a jump spell to jump higher. Probably one of the spells you'll use the most is the life spell, because no one was prepared for how hard this game was going to be. Link's sword projectile returns here, but it's been nerfed. Unlike in Zelda 1, where it flew full screen, it only goes about 4 block lengths here. The sword itself is also much shorter than the first game. Link is taller, yeah, but the sword also feels more like a dagger in length. Link's definitely not overcompensating for anything with this sword. The beam only works when you have full life though, so make sure you play perfect. And now we get to the fairy spell, where you transform into a fairy that allows you to bypass locked doors and fly over tough jumps. Originally, the fairy had a very different use.
Ever since I started making the first game in the series, I've been saying that the third Zelda will feature a party. One that consists of the protagonist, who's a mix between an elf and a fighter, a magic user, and a girl. The fairy that appeared in Adventure of Link was actually a party member designed for Zelda 3. A girl who looked a little like a fairy and whose role consisted of reconnaissance. Like the characters in action games that don't engage enemies in combat, but rather go and scout out the surroundings and return to you safely. Shigeru Miyamoto.
The party of heroes never materialized for the third Zelda game. Maybe that's why Miyamoto gave the okay for putting the fairy into Zelda 2. Another one of Link's spells is called Spell. Confusing? Yes. Many Zelda 2 guides call this the Spell of Spells, or simply Spell. The Spell will transform certain enemies into the weakest enemy in the game, known as a bot, a round blob that bears an uncanny resemblance to the weakest enemy in Dragon Quest, the slime. Dragon Quest was so popular that if you asked a Japanese kid in the 80s to draw slime, they would draw this, the DQ slime. Zelda 2 used the slime aesthetic and called it the bot, while the stronger red version is called a bit. Many enemy favorites from the first game would return, all with major reworks and redesigns to fit the new combat system. Zelda 2 would feature many new enemies, never seen before in a Zelda game, and some never to be seen in a Zelda game ever again. Okay, some of them do appear in the Zelda CDI games, but Nintendo pretends those games don't exist. The floating Moa enemies resemble Hitodama. In Japanese folklore, these are souls of deceased humans, probably why in the game they tend to appear in the graveyard. At the end of these palace mazes, you will find a boss. In Zelda 1, defeating the boss could be a puzzle in themselves, with many requiring you to use a certain item to slay them. But in Zelda 2, I know you've heard this a lot already, but it was all about the action, requiring you to find the right moment to strike and not get hit yourself at the same time. A few bosses do require spells to defeat them. The Thunder spell is a must for the final boss, Thunderbird. Normally, the Thunder spell deals the same amount of damage as 2 strikes from a level 8 sword attack. But for the final boss, it works differently. Thunderbird is invincible until you use it, much like the final boss Ganon in the first game, where you needed the silver arrow to defeat him. After Thunderbird goes down, one would think you were done, and you are once again the hero of Hyrule. But late in the game's development, Miyamoto added in a new final boss, the darkness within you. This is the first appearance of Shadow Link in a Zelda game. Shadow Link has all the same moves as you because he is you.
Wow!
He can be the toughest boss in the game or the easiest, which I will cover in a later chapter because it changes depending on the version you play. One of the interesting things he'll do, which is also kind of creepy, is he'll just stand there, staring. Zelda 1 was a barren land devoid of towns and villages. But Miyamoto and crew wanted to take Zelda 2 a step further and make actual towns to explore, filling them with townsfolk to interact with and buildings to enter. Much of the groundwork for the towns in Zelda 2 seems to come from the Dragon Slayer series of PC games, those being Xanadu and its sequel, Dragon Slayer Jr., Romancia. These games were made by Nihon Falcom, who were making a name for themselves in the RPG genre among the Japanese PC users of the 80s. In a lot of ways, Miyamoto and the team were building Zelda 2 to sit somewhere between the fast-paced action games of the arcade and the complex, sprawling adventures of PC role-playing games. But most importantly, for Miyamoto, the game had to be playable and accessible to a wide audience. Building on the idea of becoming stronger as you play deeper into the game, these towns would be where you learn the spells and the upward and downward strikes. Yeah, you don't get to start with them. You'll be tasked to find basement-dwelling old men that will grant you the power of this spell knowledge. The city guards are the ones who can teach you the ways of the warrior, meaning the up and down strikes. Oh, and also the block-breaking ability. There would also be a certain lovely lady in each town that if you speak to her, she'll invite you in and restore your life.
Stop by for a while.
What her and Link do in there to restore his life meter is left up to your imagination. Same goes for the old woman who invites you in and replenishes your magic meter. Something interesting to note, there's no money in the game, anywhere. The rupees of the first game are gone. Perhaps the team figured that all the time you'll spend leveling up Link is cost enough. Though my guess it is probably something to do with more of the hardware limitation, as it was such a huge factor in the decisions Miyamoto and the team made for the game. But also that begs the question, how does Link pay for the services of these lovely ladies? The team would need to create a way to connect the towns and the palaces. Cue the return of the Overworld map. But where in Zelda 1, the overworld view sat at the same distance as it did when you were in a dungeon, Zelda 2's overworld zoomed out more, very close to the viewpoint in the arcade game Dragon Buster, which was also a side-scrolling dungeon crawler. Dragon Buster, though, is very much an arcade game in that its field map only allows you to follow a set path, with a few options to choose along the way at certain forks in the road. No towns in Dragon Buster. All these landmarks? They are dungeons. Zelda 2's overworld map improves upon this by allowing you to travel in any direction, but with such an open area to explore, the team knew there would need to be battles. 3 small squiggly ghost-like symbols would appear. Touch one and you're yanked into a side-scrolling battle area that you'll need to fight or escape from. The colors of the squiggly ghosts do matter. You learn quick. The dark purple ones are the ones with the more difficult encounters.
There were various restrictions at that time, so we put in the level up system as a way to have players battling enemies time and time again. As for the symbol encounters, the field map was narrow, so the system added a luck factor to it. Tadashi Sugiyama.
Certain areas of the field map/overworld map hold invisible traps, dropping you into areas where you'll have to fight your way through, such as bridge sections, very much like Super Mario Bros. The Bago Bago enemies you encounter here act and move very similar to the Cheep Cheeps in Super Mario Bros. And what's a Zelda game without secrets? Hidden areas across the map that can contain experience points bags or various items. The best ones being the heart container and magic containers, as these will add more life and magic points permanently. Zelda 2's puzzles revolve around you finding out where and how to get to the basement guys or a palace. Often this involves getting info from townsfolk and then sending you out on a fetch quest for an item or using a spell to find the secret entrance. It helps break up the monotony of town to dungeon, next town to next dungeon structure. Still, Miyamoto was not pleased with these moments when solving puzzles.
R-Type's cutscenes are really good. It's like you're sitting in the dock the whole time. It's easy to grasp when you're able to move on your own, and you can fire bullets whenever you want. Just between you and I don't think Adventure of Link had very good cutscenes. You feel like you're watching things happen rather than achieving them yourself. Shigeru Miyamoto.
R-Type is a space shooter that Nintendo got the rights to distribute in North American arcades. You're always in control of the ship, even as these big bosses appear on screen, which I think is what Miyamoto's referring to, and I do think Miyamoto's definition of cutscene was different back then when he did this interview in 1989. From action shooters like R-Type to the PC role-playing games of the Dragon Slayer series, almost all games in the 1980s were difficult to complete, and Zelda 2 was no different. So, why was Zelda 2 made to be so dang difficult?
It's difficult? The foundation of action games at the time was to feel difficult for everyone. Games didn't have a ton of content at that time, so in order to have them played for as long as possible, we felt like we couldn't make them easily clearable. We also did debugging so we would play a game too much and the game would have a high difficulty that was interesting to us. Tadashi Sugiyama.
One part that separates the casuals from the hardcore is the Death Mountain run. This is where the game gets really hard, really fast. And it happens not long after the first palace, which is pretty early in the game. Fighting your way through this confusing maze with tough enemies, dead ends, and brutal platforming. Get lost and you can easily use up your entire magic meter, and with no magic meter you can't heal yourself. And it gets worse. Much worse. Zelda 2 has a live system. When you die, you start back at the last screen you entered with both meters filled, which is good, but once you lose your last life, it's all the way back to the northern castle. Meaning if you got pretty far in Death Mountain, well, guess what? You're doing it all again and making the long walk back there. Oh, and more bad news. All those experience points you fought so hard to get but haven't used yet, well, they're gone. You lost them all. It's not all bad though. If you do make it out to the other side, you get the hammer. This item allows you to break boulders which can open shortcuts. So next time you get a game over, you can just use the hammer to break the boulder and skip Death Mountain. And that is a wonderful thing. I'd love to say the game gets easier after Death Mountain, but no, it doesn't. If and when you do beat the game, after the credits roll, you are thrown into New Game Plus. Though there's really nothing plus about it. In Zelda 1, after you beat the game, you were treated to a second quest with harder enemies. Dungeons and items were all in different places. Zelda 2 has none of this. The quest and the dungeon palaces are all the same. You get to keep your spells, but you lose your extra life and magic points. The game was coming together, but Miyamoto still wasn't happy. There was still a problem with the game, and it wouldn't be solved when the game launched either. It's the biggest reason he considers the game a failure. Load times. Because the Famicom disk system is a, disk-based system, the transfer of data caused the load times. There are even load times in the disk version of Zelda 1, but they are nowhere near as bad as Zelda 2. Every time you go from the overworld into a town or a palace, you'll be greeted with this.
I think specifically in the case of Zelda 2, we had a challenge just in terms of what the hardware was capable of doing. So one thing, of course, is from a hardware perspective, if we had been able to have the switch between the scenes speed up, if that had been faster, we could have done more with how we used the side-scrolling versus the overhead view and kind of the interchange between the two. But because of the limitations on how quickly those scenes changed, we weren't able to. Shigeru Miyamoto.
It wasn't the first time hardware limitations stopped Miyamoto from his grand ambitions, and it wouldn't be the last. But maybe the story and the characters would help smooth things over. Or would they? If you're enjoying the video so far, please consider subscribing to the channel as it really helps out a small YouTuber like myself against the grand YouTube algorithm gods.
We actually see A Link to the Past as the real sequel to Legend of Zelda. Zelda 2 was more of a side story about what happened to Link after the events in Legend of Zelda. Shigeru Miyamoto.
At the start of development, Zelda 2 is considered a gaiden, the Japanese term for side story, or spin-off, not a full-fledged sequel. But before we get into Zelda 2's strange story, we need to clear something up. Many believe that the film Legend, starring Tom Cruise, heavily influenced the first Zelda game. Even major publications like Guinness World Records 2008, Gamers Edition, said that Miyamoto was influenced by the film Legend when he created The Legend of Zelda. Cruise's character, Jacko, the Green, wears green, lives in the forest, has a fairy friend, then goes on a quest to save a princess from an evil bull-like demon, much like Ganon and Zelda in the first game. The influence seems obvious, right?
Yes.
Things get murky once we take a look at the release dates. Legend was released only in the UK during December 1985, and it flopped, by the way. Zelda 1 came out in Japan February 1986. That would only leave a 3-month window where Miyamoto would have had to fly to the UK and watch the film, and I go over the tough, long development of the first game. in my Zelda 1 history where they were also making Mario at the same time, so I do not believe that Miyamoto would have had any time to do this. Legend didn't release in Japan until August 1987, and that's well after Zelda 2's release. Also, much of Legend's so-called influences on Zelda we can connect to other sources. Link always wore green, but that's because they took inspiration from Disney's Peter Pan, and he wasn't known as a forest kid until Ocarina of Time. Ganon's resemblance to a bull-like monster we know from design documents is based off the character Hakai from Journey to the West. And the fairy? Well, Peter Pan also had a fairy named Tinkerbell. Tom Cruise's character doesn't even wear green for a good portion of the film. Instead, he's donning a golden armor that seems to have no pants. So no, I don't think Legend had any influence on the original Legend of Zelda, or really Part 2, but in future entries to the series, yeah, sure, it's possible. With that out of the way, let's break down Zelda 2's overly complicated story. Takashi Tezuka, Zelda 1's assistant director, along with Miyamoto, were the two main contributors to the original Zelda story. Miyamoto pulled from his childhood memories of exploring the lush forests of his hometown of Sonobe for the look, feel, and locations of Zelda 1. Tezuka brought his love for J.R.R. Tolkien novels like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, though one could say Tolkien's novels influenced every fantasy game and movie ever made. Tezuka, though, had nothing to do with the map or the gameplay design of the second Zelda game, because he was stuck in Mario 2 and then 3 development hell. Though near the end of Zelda 2's production, somehow he found time to come up with the story for Zelda 2. In Zelda 1, they actually had a writer brought in to pen the story in the instruction booklet that Miyamoto and Tezuka came up with. It's not known if this was the case for Zelda 2, but the art in the instruction manual was made like cel-shaded animation. They drew the backgrounds first, then laid the character art over the top, which is very much in line with the art in the first game's instruction manual. Zelda 1 had a commercial where the art of the first game was brought to life, but Zelda 2 received no such commercial. Maybe there was a plan for a commercial like this at some point, which would then make sense as to why the art was done this way, but that commercial for some reason seems to never have materialized.
Several years after Ganon was destroyed, Link learns from Impa about the another sleeping Princess Zelda. He is told she can only awaken with the number 3 Triforce sealed in the Great Sanctuary at Dis Valley. To remove the seal, crystals must be embedded into a stone statue standing in 6 sanctuaries. Link sets out on an adventurous quest.
Zelda 2's use of English grammar would insult any English teacher. Why they decided to change the spelling of Triforce from T-R-I to T-R-Y with a dash is beyond me. The first game spelled it T-R-I, and yes, I'm referring to the Japanese version. It was in English. It's not uncommon for Japanese video games to have English words in their games. English words have a cool factor to them over there, same as Asian symbols tend to have a cool factor in America. Most Japanese can recognize English words, though they may not be fluent in speaking English. The plural form of sanctuaries is clearly misspelled. Stranger still, the Japanese manual refers to them as shinden, which translates closer to temple, not sanctuary. This is why they resemble the Parthenon, a Greek temple. Then the US version would change them to palaces because Nintendo of America didn't allow religious references in any US Nintendo games. I will just keep referring to them as palaces to make it easy. Dis Valley here was probably supposed to be Death Valley, but was mistranslated. But it's here, for the first time, we learn about the third Triforce piece that would live on throughout the series. Zelda 1 only had 2 pieces, the Triforce of Wisdom and the Triforce of Power. Zelda 2 introduced us to a new power triangle called the Triforce of Courage. Here in Zelda 2, for the first time, we see the full Triforce together to become the iconic symbol within Zelda. But it has a far deeper meaning within Japanese culture, dating all the way back to medieval Japan, as it was the Mon, or family crest of the Hojo clan, who brought an era of peace and prosperity to Japan, and fought bravely against the mighty Mongol armies. The 3 triangles represent the 3 scales of the dragon god, or guardian deity of fishermen. The symbol can still be seen around Japan today, from souvenirs to company logos, like the energy corporation Mitsuroko. The use of the word another refers to the fact that Zelda in Zelda 2 is not, I repeat, not the same Zelda that was in Part 1. Yeah, it's a different Zelda. Where your goal in the original was the princess trope of saving a princess, they couldn't do that again, so they fell on the next best princess trope, the sleeping princess. Very reminiscent of the folktale Sleeping Beauty. Miyamoto loved Disney movies, so like using Peter Pan for inspiration, why not use Disney's Sleeping Beauty? Where in Sleeping Beauty it took the kiss from a handsome prince to awaken her, in Zelda 2 it wouldn't be so easy.
Hyrule was on the road to ruin. The power that the vile heart of Ganon had left behind was causing chaos and disorder in Hyrule.
Man, guess we weren't as successful as we thought in the first game. We defeated Ganon, we saved the princess, and still the world sucks.
The key to Ganon's return was the blood of Link, the valiant lad who overthrew the king of evil. Ganon would be revived by sacrificing Link and sprinkling his blood on the ashes of Ganon.
That's dark. But that logic does tend to work in horror movies, such as 1966 Dracula, Prince of Darkness, using blood on his ashes to bring back the famous Count himself. Oddly, the main bad guy from the first game is only a subplot, as you never fight Ganon in the game. He only reappears when you die. The real meat and potatoes of the story, though, starts with the first appearance of the iconic Triforce symbol on Link's hand, a motif that would continue on into other Zelda games. It happens here, though, because Link is nearing 16 years old. Yeah, strange stuff happens to you at that age. The Hyrule Historia says Link is 10 years old in the first game, while Miyamoto said he was about 12 in the first game, in an Iwata Asks interview, leading to eternal speculation and discourse on the Zelda forums.
At the end of development, we decided on a story and that Link would be 16 years old, then attached The Legend of Zelda 2, and released it as the second game in the series. Tadashi Sugiyama.
Luckily, Impa, Zelda's most trusted nursemaid, knew about the changes Link was going through. Her name's Impa, Imparts. Get it? She takes Link to a door called
The door that does not open.
His glowing Triforce hand is the key to
The door that does not open.
And here they find the new, or rather old Zelda who's been sleeping for ages. Turns out she's Zelda the First. Impa explains that a long time ago, but not as far as Skyward Sword long ago, the King of Hyrule kept the peace using the Triforce. When he died, the kingdom should have gone to the prince, but the prince could only inherit part of the Triforce. Then there was this magician who was close to the king and told the prince that the king said something to Princess Zelda about the Triforce. So the prince went to his sister, asking about the Triforce of Courage. And Zelda was like, "Nah, bro." The magician, angered by this, threatened to put Zelda into an eternal sleep if she didn't tell him where the last piece of the Triforce was. Of course, Princess Zelda got hit with the spell and fell into more than just a cat nap. And then the magician died, because he cast the sleep spell. I mean, sleep spells don't cost that much magic points in any RPG. Granted, yeah, this is a eternal sleep spell, but still. Worst magician ever. With the princess now in an eternal sleep, the prince decrees that no one may forget this tragedy. From here on, every princess would be named Zelda. Though it does seem that everyone did forget this because it seems only Impa knows anything about all this. And Impa still knows more, grabbing 6 crystals and a scroll bearing the same mark as Link. These 6 crystals have been handed down for generations through Impa's family, for when a great king would appear. Once Link gains the Triforce of Courage, it will break the spell, waking up Zelda. And as a bonus, bring peace to Hyrule. Well, if he can make the pilgrimage to the 6 palaces, defeat its guardian deities, later shortened to just guardians, and place a crystal in each palace to unlock the entrance to the Great Palace, where the Triforce of Courage hides. So here's the thing. The prince, the magician, are never seen or mentioned anywhere in the game, and Impa's name only appears in the opening title crawl. The pre-story is all told in the game's instruction manual. The manual also says Link carries the magical sword in his left hand. This goes along with Link being left-handed like he was in the first game. Link would continue as a lefty throughout the series until a certain game would change all that. But that's a story for another day. The instruction manual also confirms the return of the magic sword, which is the best sword you could get in the first game. And it is the best sword you can get in the second game because it is the only sword you can get in the second game, confirming that in the opening titles that this is the magic sword, though you never show up to pull it out of this dirt rock. There's also a neat Easter egg to Dragon Quest in the town of Saria on a grave. It says, "Here lies Loto." It's a reference to the hero in Dragon Quest. This trend continues in the first Final Fantasy game, where a grave says, "Here lies Link." Though for the US release of Final Fantasy I, the name Link was swapped out for Erdrick, which is the name Loto was changed to for the American release of Dragon Quest. Later releases of Final Fantasy I would revert it back to, "Here lies Link." Towns in Zelda 2 bear important names, as they would become the names of the 7 sages in the Zelda game Ocarina of Time, with Ocarina of Time taking place before the events of Zelda 2. I also want to point out the fact that the palaces were called temples in the Japanese version, loosely connecting to the fact that some of the dungeons in Ocarina of Time bear the name temple. Even though the sage Saria is in the forest temple, and in Zelda 2, Saria Town is known as the Water Town of Saria, Ruto is actually in the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time. They did get Darunia right though, because he lives on the mountain, and it's the mountain town of Darunia in Zelda 2. Mido though is not a sage, but still has a town named after him. Maybe there's more to Mido than meets the eye. On second thought, no. Zelda 2's world map was made to seem bigger, with Hyrule spanning 2 large continents. There's even a section that's supposed to represent Zelda 1's map here. In the NES Atlas, it talks about the Zelda 1 area, saying it should look familiar to you if you explored Spectacled Rock in the first game. And it does match Zelda 1 as a miniature version, with notable locations like the lake, the graveyard, Death Mountain, and the forest. It's interesting to think that the palaces and the guardians were all put there by the king, meaning the whole game is just one big test for Link. But that does give credence to you facing off against Shadow Link at the end, because if this is all just one big test for Link's character, then that does go along with the idea that Link's greatest enemy is himself. Side note, Peter Pan, the character Link's design is based on, also has problems with his shadow. And this game marks the end of Link's journey, at least this Link's journey, because later games break apart everything and split the Zeldaverse into 3 different timelines, slotting Zelda 2 at the end of the Fallen Hero timeline, though the order of the games has changed over the years. In 1998, this is what Miyamoto claimed the order was.
Ocarina of Time is the first story, then the original Legend of Zelda, then Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, and finally, A Link to the Past. It's not very clear where Link's Awakening fits in. It could be any time after Ocarina of Time. Shigeru Miyamoto.
At one time on Zelda.com, it said that Link's Awakening from the Game Boy took place here, on the raft in Zelda 2, when Link travels from Western Hyrule to Eastern Hyrule. In the final moments of Zelda 2, we get a rare moment of Zelda kissing Link. At least a kiss is implied, as we can't actually see what's going on behind the curtain. It's only ever happened twice in the series, with the only other time being in the final ending, after beating both Oracle games. I guess this makes Link the new king, since Impa held on to the crystals for when, as she says it, a great king will come. Also, does that mean that this Zelda is the next in line to be queen, since she is technically the oldest compared to the Zelda from the first game? That's going to be an awkward family conversation. What was Zelda from the first game doing during the second game? I mean, what do medieval princesses even do?
A medieval princess's primary duty was to produce an heir and secure the succession of the dynasty. Once married, a princess had to navigate the complex politics of court life.
It removes the stinkiness from my dirty socks.
She was expected to be a gracious hostess, entertaining important guests, and attending courtly events.
Oh, I guess she was doing that, since she's nowhere to be found in the second game. Link is technically the new king, and Zelda here is the oldest princess. Yeah, this Zelda is centuries old, and Link is almost 16.
Would you forget about her? She's 10,000 years old.
So what?
The infamous Koji Kondo was the music composer for the original Legend of Zelda, creating some of its most iconic themes and sound effects. After Zelda 1, Kondo went on to writing music and sound effects for the mysterious Murasame Castle, and Super Mario Bros. 2, Volleyball, Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, and then Super Mario Bros. 3. Yeah, the guy had a lot going on, so Zelda 2's music went to someone else. Someone who is often seen as the unsung hero of Nintendo music, Akito Nakasuka, who was originally hired at Nintendo for Research and Development Group 2, not R&D 4 where Koji Kondo and most of the Zelda 2 team was. But amongst the 4 teams, it was not uncommon for members from one team to lend a hand to another team. Nakasuka had worked with Kondo on the game Devil World. Then he moved on to composing music for Clu Clu Land, Excite Bike, and Ice Climber. His next task was to build the epic soundtrack for Zelda 2, and he would actually use very little of the music Kondo composed in the first game, instead choosing to make each melody almost entirely his own. Here's Koji Kondo's Overworld theme for Zelda 1. Nakasuka uses the beginning melody of Kondo's Overworld theme as an intro for his new Overworld theme in Zelda 2. You never hear that part again once the track repeats on its loop. It's a seamless transition, subtly letting you know that this game is going to be different. I will be using the Famicom Disk System music and the sounds as we compare the differences against Zelda 1. The NES in America didn't have the extra sound capabilities of the FDS, but we'll compare them in Chapter 6 with Japan versus US version differences. So don't worry, in case you were worried. In many ways, Zelda 2 benefits from having a different composer, adding a very different sound of music to a very different style of gameplay. Whereas the dungeon theme from Part 1 had a darker tone to build tension, Zelda 2's dungeons, aka the palaces, create a faster paced melody designed to coincide with a more action-oriented gameplay, which is a common musical route for action platformers. One of the more drastic differences is the final dungeon. Zelda 1's final dungeon has a crazy mixture of sounds and melodies that slam together to create this strange balance between music and noise. But it still succeeds in its job to evoke dread and tension, while Zelda 2 goes with a grand opening, giving you the feeling of being a great hero riding into the final battle. Then settling into a more tense melody. Kondo liked to mix musical genres in Zelda 1, taking folk and classical jazz to give it this otherworldly feel, which enhances the exploration aspect of the first game. Nakasuka in Zelda 2, on the other hand, likes to subvert your expectations, then take the melodies in an unexpected direction. They start one way, then smoothly transition into a surprising direction, complementing the unpredictable nature of the battles. I'm not saying one is better than the other because both composers were making music for essentially 2 different games. What I think is important to know is that the choices both composers made for the music all stem from the type of gameplay. Video game composers back then also did the sound effects. Here, Nakasuka again changes many of Kondo's prior sounds, though he did keep Kondo's pick up an item sound for when you gain a new spell. Zelda 2 continued the terrible tradition of having that annoying beeping sound when you were low on life. And Nakasuka did just as good as Kondo, making that sound just as annoying as it was in the first game. It is possible that many of the sounds and music themes from Zelda 2 could have been just as iconic as the sounds from the original, had they gone on to later Zelda games. But alas, they did not, and as Kondo would return for the 3rd entry in the series, solidified his themes as the main Zelda themes we would come to know. When Nakasuka made music for Zelda 2, the series wasn't the pop culture icon it is today. with decades worth of musical history. This allowed Nakasuka to do his own thing and not feel the pressure to live up to the master game composer that Kondo is seen as today. Nakasuka really rose to the occasion for Zelda 2, and though the sequel was less popular, for those of us who played Zelda 2, the music is just as iconic and unforgettable. Despite Miyamoto being unhappy with Zelda 2, they were gearing up for release.
It's almost like a different series. That's why we named it The Adventure of Link. It's a very different game. Shigeru Miyamoto.
The first Zelda was titled in Japan, The Hyrule Fantasy, The Legend of Zelda. They originally thought Zelda would continue as a series using the Hyrule Fantasy title, but the Hyrule Fantasy part was left off the American release. When Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka were asked why the Hyrule Fantasy title wasn't used again, they had this to say.
I don't know.
I've forgotten.
Wasn't the Hyrule Fantasy on Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link?
No, it wasn't.
The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which was for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, already had a subtitle, so maybe we thought that tacking on the Hyrule Fantasy would make the title too long.
The game would release as The Legend of Zelda 2, Rinku no Boken, which translates to The Adventure of Link, releasing in Japan on January 14th, 1987, to kick off the year. The game reviewed well in Japan's premier gaming magazine, Famitsu, giving it a 36 out of 40. The Adventure of Link would only have free reign in stores for about 2 weeks before the fever set in, and I'm talking about the Dragon Quest II fever. Kids skipped school, adults skipped work to run out and grab a copy of Dragon Quest II, releasing 2 weeks after The Adventure of Link, selling 500,000 copies on release day, then a whopping 2.4 million copies by the year's end. Zelda 2 still held its own in Japan, being the cool new video game for those who had the Famicom Disk System's upgrade, which was to its benefit and its detriment. Many Famicom owners didn't have the disk system, so both Zelda games would remain unavailable to them. Dragon Quest II had no such problem. It was on a cartridge, and anyone with a Famicom could play it. Dividing their player base was just one of the many problems plaguing the FDS, from the internal belt breaking to how easily the discs could be demagnetized causing errors, to its consumer-friendly disc rewritability, where you could go into your local Japanese retail store, taking, say, your Zelda 1 disc, then paying a low sum of money to have your disc rewritten with Zelda 2, or any FDS game you choose. This was great for the customer, but bad for publishers and third-party game developers. The low price crushed the ability for third-party game companies to make huge profits, so it wasn't long before they decided to stop making FDS games altogether and focus solely on making cartridges. You could say this helped both Zelda games, because they would have less and less competition on the FDS, but not good for the FDS as a platform. Piracy also ran rampant with the discs, and everything Nintendo did to stop it failed. The worst part, though, is all the exclusive FDS features, like the ability to save your game and the expanded memory, became non-exclusive as cartridge technology improved, with better chips and an internal battery that allowed for game saves. The FDS went from a strong start to struggling more and more with each passing year. By 1990, Nintendo discontinued the FDS, ending its lifespan. By comparison, the regular Famicom wasn't discontinued in Japan until 2003. That's a whole 13 years later. As for Zelda 2, one thing that's an indication that it wasn't as popular in Japan as the first game was that after the demise of the FDS, Zelda 1 got a cartridge re-release in 1994 for the Famicom. Zelda 2 would get no such release and remain stuck on the disk system in Japan for years to come. Nintendo advertised Zelda 2 with a commercial featuring the same dynamic duo from the first game, a famous child actor in Japan, and a popular Japanese TV personality, giving us more loudmouth Zelda shenanigans. 1987 was a turning point for Shigeru Miyamoto, as his dislike for RPG systems changed, as he incorporated more RPG elements into The Adventure of Link. He also had a dislike for text-based adventures, the way they solved puzzles and actions through menus. But then he was a producer on a text-based adventure, Famicom Mukashi Banashi Shin Onigashima, which translates to Famicom Fairy Tales, New Island of Ogres, which used all those menu commands he avoided using in Zelda 2. And then soon, Miyamoto would team up with Japan's famous copywriter, Shigesato Itoi, to make a full-fledged RPG called Mother, known as Earthbound in America. Miyamoto was evolving as a game designer, realizing that just because he didn't like certain game mechanics didn't mean there wasn't a place for them in the world of gaming. The Adventure of Link may have released in Japan, but Miyamoto wasn't done with the game yet. He was going to fix it, solve its problems, and erase his failure. For better or worse, The Adventure of Link was going to see some major changes for its next stop, America. It would be almost 2 years after Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link released in Japan before it would arrive on American shores. Producer Shigeru Miyamoto would not waste this opportunity. He and the team would continue to work on Zelda 2 even after its release, and Link's two directors, Tadashi Sugiyama and Yasuhisa Yamamura, were also working on the vertical platformer directed by Kensuke Tanabe. Tanabe would become a key figure in future Zelda titles, but not for Zelda 2, so you can forget I mentioned him. This vertical platformer they were working on would become Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic. Translation: Dream Factory, Heart-Pounding Panic. Released in July of 1987 in a collaboration with Fuji Television for their Yume Kojo Festival. I'm bringing this game up now because it becomes important to the story later. Directors Yamamura and Sugiyama, during and probably after their duties on Doki Doki Panic, worked on revising Zelda 2. The US version of Zelda 2 had to go from disc to cartridge. The Famicom got rebranded as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, in North America, and never received the disc system add-on. But with cartridge technology improving, and an internal battery for game saves, leveled the playing field against disc versus cartridge, with a few exceptions. In Zelda 2, the water in the overworld would cease to move, as the NES didn't have the VRAM capabilities of the FDS. Same for the lava in the Valley of Death. Despite these shortfalls, there are many graphical enhancements, one of the biggest being Link himself, adding a new sprite animation for holding up special items, no longer needing to stab them. Plus, they gave Link a mouth. Next, the Link sprite was shifted on the raft. Rather than facing you on the raft, Link now looks where he's going. The town's got a population increase of 3 new characters. The basement old dudes got an animation to look more lively. The river guards were changed from looking like the bearded men with a helmet to looking like actual guards, and one got a weapon swap. In the US version, the river guards are a palette swap of the swordsmen. Zelda's Sleeping Chambers got a Gratian Column add-on, giving the northern castle a more majestic scene of luxury and wealth. And they threw in some torches for good measure. The overworld's squiggly ghost-like spirits that warp you into battles were changed, possibly to make it easier to know which encounter is more difficult. Certain parts of the game were censored for religious references or anything Nintendo of America deemed inappropriate. The River Devil was changed to look less like a devil and more like a bug-eyed spider thing. Goddess statue was altered to look less like, I'm not sure actually. Though the name was changed from Goddess statue to trophy. The kidnapped child no longer rests in a baby prison crib. Link just lifts him above his head and puts him somewhere on his person for safekeeping until the child is returned. I believe in the original FDS version, the idea was that you were cutting the kid free of his bonds. But I'm sure NOA was not too keen on the implications of this, or a child in a prison crib. The king's tomb found in the graveyard was shrunk to 1 screen. The red potion and the enemies that were there are gone, in favor of an old woman who reveals to you that this is the king's tomb. Crosses on graves were okay for NOA, but crosses on top of buildings? Ho ho ho, no no no. They were changed. Same with dungeons being called temples. They were changed to palaces. Nintendo of America would become notorious for purging all religious references in all NES games. The battle theme is different in the NES version, for some reason. And then we have one of those rare moments where Link speaks. The NES version has him looking under a table and he says, "I found a mirror under the table." Guess it's a good thing they gave him a mouth in this version. In the FDS version, it translates more along the lines of, Link found a mirror under the table, so it's not him talking. One of the most famous translation missteps comes when you meet this guy. I am Error. Many kids from the 80s, myself included, thought this was an actual mistake, or rather an error, in the game. When looking at the Japanese text, a more literal translation would be, "My name is Error." The game's translation is not wrong, it is the same as saying, "I am Link," or "I am Zelda." But with a name like Error, that makes it unclear since he doesn't say anything else. So, why is his name Error? Later in the game, you'll come across a man named Bagu. However, if we consult the Japanese text, it shows that his name is not actually Bagu, but Bug, like computer bug. In the Japanese version, Bug is written phonetically, becoming Bagu. It's supposed to be a cute developer joke. The two men are named Bug and Error, both computer terms. The translator missed this and confused an entire generation of children. The dungeon palaces got a texture and color makeover. The Japanese version palaces, or rather temples, have 3 with the gray brick texture, and 3 with the blue texture, while the US version added a bunch of new brick colors. Special note on the Japanese version's blue texture temples. When you get to the boss area, it actually switches back to the gray bricks. Not the case in the US version. The final Great Palace / temple remains the same color in both versions. Some of the bosses themselves would be altered and improved. The wizard Karok's sprite would be turned so that he was looking at Link instead of you. The fire-breathing boss named Barba wouldn't be so stiff. The name Barba is a curious translation from the Japanese name, which is Barubagia. Japanese doesn't have a sound for V and L, so a common thing to do for English translations is to replace those sounds with the letters B or R. So a translator could tweak Barubagia into Barba. Game localization wasn't as sophisticated back in the 80s. These days, the Japanese alphabet has a replacement for the V sound. This would technically make the name Volbagia or Volbagia, but once Ocarina of Time hit in 1998, it would solidify the name as Volvagia or Volvagia. I'm doing my best to pronounce the names accurately. If you feel my pronunciations of these names are off, please feel free to correct me in the comments. The NES version would get a new boss. Miyamoto really wanted bigger enemies for the game. In fact, this is something he wanted for all his games. I mean, why do you think Mario got supersized? But technology always got in his way. For Zelda 2, he was able to replace the boss Germafencer with a slightly bigger boss. In the Japanese version, you fight Germafencer twice, once in Palace 2 and then again in Palace 5. He is replaced in the 5th Palace for the US version, with an all-new big hulking boss, Guma. He is bigger, but I'm sure Miyamoto would have wanted him even bigger. The spell called Reflex in the Japanese version was changed to Reflect, which makes more sense. Executive producer was originally misspelled in the staff credits, but fixed for the US version. The staff credits also got a nice text brightness upgrade. Miyamoto and his team all used pseudonyms in place of their real names, just like Zelda 1, because back then game companies feared other companies poaching their talent. Unlike the Japanese version, Ganon would make an appearance in the US version. Well, only at the game over screen. Originally there was only text telling you of Ganon's return, but in the US version, you get to see Ganon in all his evil glory. The sound had to change though because the NES didn't have the extra sound channel of the FDS, meaning the NES couldn't make this sound. It was replaced with this sound. It comes from Nintendo's other game, Punch-Out! Ganon's laugh is a slowed down version of boxer Soda Popinski's laugh. Shadow Link in the US version has a flaw that allows you to defeat him easily. You just crouch in the left corner and stab away. In the Japanese version, he'll jump on you at some point, making this method not work. I tested this on an original Famicom disk system, and yes, it's true, he will jump on you. But then I tested it on original NES hardware, and he jumped on me. Twice, in 2 different tries. So then I took my cartridge's ROM and put it on an emulator, where the easy method worked perfectly. I don't know, maybe I was doing something wrong. Comment below if you have any thoughts on this. It's still an effective way to beat him in any version, just make sure you get back in the corner after he jumps on you. According to the website The Cutting Room Floor, the reason for Shadow Link being different in each version is possibly due to a computer error accidentally sneaking in, or possibly the disc could hold more complex programming than the cartridge. With the lack of an extra sound channel, Zelda 2's music on the NES sounds different compared to Japan's FDS. Let's have a listen. The opening title crawl got a grammar touch-up. The Japanese version of Zelda 2 held on to the Ganon spelling with a double N, same as Zelda 1, but the instruction manual for Zelda 1 actually had the single N spelling of Ganon. Then in the title crawl for Zelda 2 for the US version, Ganon would only have one N in his name. The Zelda 2 instruction manual would also retain the single N spelling of Ganon. This would become the official spelling of Link's arch nemesis. They also took out the Another Zelda part, leaving it as a sleeping spell was cast on Princess Zelda, which, if you played the first game, would make you think that this is the same Zelda from the first game, unless you read the instruction manual. The Japanese FDS version wasn't much better, saying Another Sleeping Princess Zelda, making it sound as if there's more than one sleeping princess, and they're all named Zelda. Triforce was changed back to the Zelda 1 spelling of it, and Disc Valley is removed because it never made sense anyway. The biggest overhaul, though, comes to the increase in experience points you'll need. Instead of each category costing the same value, attack now costs the most, followed by magic, then life. Meaning, in the US version, you'll need to earn an additional 12,950 points to max out all your stats. You can choose to save your experience points when prompted for a level up and hold out for that much sought after attack power upgrade. The good thing is, though, you don't have the same save problem of the FDS. Let me explain. See, on the disk system, it would only save the level of your lowest stat. So, say you pumped 8 levels into attack power, 5 into magic, and then 3 into life. If you saved and turned off the game, when you returned, all 3 stats would be at 3 since it was the lowest. Ouch. All that work for nothing. This basically forces you to play the Japanese version of the game, leveling all attributes evenly. The NES version keeps all 3 stats exactly where you left them when saving, so you can choose whether you want to focus on attack power or maybe more of a defensive playthrough. But the game is so hard, you're likely going to want to increase everything to max anyway. To offset the XP increase, certain enemies give you more points than the Japanese version. But let's be honest, it doesn't make up for the increase. Not by a long shot. To make matters worse, enemies such as the Tin Suits and Bago Bago are now able to steal experience points from you when they hit you. One thing that stayed the same through both versions is the magic points values for spells. The MP cost actually decreases as you gain magic levels, but the decrease is anything but even. Reflect, Fire, and the Spell cost the most MP at the start, but by max level they see the highest decrease in MP cost. The Fire spell, which was basically useless in the Japanese version, mainly because it was not worth the cost of using your magic points, is more necessary in the US version because the Tektites and Basilisk enemies can only be damaged by using that spell. Enemy placements and types of enemies shifted in certain areas. The US version also adds more trap areas. You can see in this area here, the US version has 3 different traps, but in the Japanese version, there's only 2. One good thing about a move from disc to cartridge was the elimination of load times, giving the game a more fluid pace as you travel from overworld to town to palace, and back again. Kill mode in the FDS version was changed to elimination mode. This is the mode where you can delete your save file. Nintendo really saw each save slot as a living link, so deleting him is murder. Nintendo of America, with its focus on kid players, yeah, they were not going to go for a kill mode. Finally, Miyamoto was told enough is enough. Zelda 2 was ready for American release along with Super Mario Bros. 2. Oh, not the original Super Mario Bros. 2. That was deemed too hard by Nintendo of America. Doki Doki Panic was brought in and painted over with Super Mario Bros. Characters to become the US version of Super Mario Bros. 2. And so, Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link and Super Mario Bros. 2 would become the most sought-after games for the Christmas season of 1987 in America, and almost no one would be able to buy them. (1987) USA was filled with dirty dancing. IBM revealed the world's first laptop computer. There was a new James Bond in Dalton, Timothy Dalton, and Mike Tyson dominated boxing in the ring and on the Nintendo Entertainment System. At home, kids were enjoying the first Legend of Zelda. And their first glimpse of its sequel came in the Nintendo Fun Club newsletter. The third fall issue showed a grown-up Link. The preview was prepping you for a much different game while still telling you it was gonna be exciting and that you would enjoy its super challenging gameplay.
Awesome! Intense!
Nintendo also made a big showing at CES in 1987, where big store retailers got their first look at the next Zelda game, promoting its built-in 5-year lithium battery for game saves and sporting a golden cartridge, same as the first game did. Adding in the battery save feature upped the production cost of a cartridge, which is why many FDS games, when they were converted to a cartridge, didn't do it at all. Metroid and Kid Icarus swapped over to the dreaded password system, while Konami for Castlevania cut out any kind of save feature altogether, turning the game into a super challenge. The winter issue of the Nintendo Fun Club News expanded its Zelda 2 coverage, revealing screenshots of the game. One shot shows the cross atop the building before Nintendo of America got around to censoring it. This sneak peek describes the game in further detail, pumping up Ganon as the main villain you will fight, even though you never fight him in the game. Then there's this very strange line. And there are even more deep gameplay challenges of interactive video with maps to make, items to buy, and things to remember. Interactive video with maps to make? Is this what they consider an interactive video? Maps to make? Out of what? You can draw your own, I guess. Items to buy? There's no money in the game. Not sure what the communication was to end up with all of these odd claims about the game. No release date was given in any of these previews. Nintendo of America built a powerhouse of a merchandising team, and if you were shopping around in the late 80s, chances are you would come across the world of Nintendo, a fantasy land of all things Nintendo, crammed into a corner at your local toy store or department store. It was a store within a store. Nintendo built displays around their best-selling games, like this one here, on the first Zelda. The reason you don't see Link prominently displayed anywhere is that he wasn't considered popular enough to be featured back then. Zelda 2 with its added subtitle of The Adventure of Link would help to change that. When Zelda 1 was released, most kids, including my treehugger self, thought that the little green guy was Zelda. Sadly, this was a common mistake back then. I mean, we all thought that Samus was named Metroid, and the guy in Contra was named Contra. 80s kids had no internet, and many of us couldn't even afford a subscription to Nintendo Power, so we just assumed things. Or maybe that was just me. One interesting thing about the information released in the Nintendo Fun Club News up to this point was that they never called it The Legend of Zelda 2, only referring to it as a sequel to the original, or just as The Adventure of Link. Seems as though NOA was still trying to figure out what the actual title was going to be. 1987 ended as a disaster for toy companies, with low sales, but not for Nintendo, as the NES console would go on to be the best-selling Christmas toy that year. And Nintendo, as a whole, accounted for $750 million in sales. Toy stores going into 1988 will begin to rely on Nintendo more and more. Nintendo just had to deliver its two most anticipated games, Zelda 2 and Super Mario Bros. 2. but a storm was brewing on the tech side that would rock the very foundations of the industry. Leveling up into 1988, the sneak peek section of the February-March issue of Nintendo Power revealed the title we've all been waiting for. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Missing would be the Legend of part. The Japanese version of the game has it, but not the US version. Seems NOA knew it was a very different game, but wanted you to know it was a sequel, but not a sequel, but still a sequel, so please buy it. It would be the only game in the Zelda series not to have The Legend of in its title. The Adventure of Link would make front page of the 6th issue of the Fun Club News, but with all its promoting of the sequel, led many to believe that the game was coming out soon. It was not. The release date kept getting pushed from February to July, then to the fall season, and still nothing. Nintendo would stay quiet on what the problem was until the June-July Fun Club News, admitting to what many merchandisers and journalists had already been claiming for months. A computer chip shortage had hit Japan. Memory chips were in short supply, affecting not only the video game industry, but the entire tech industry. Despite Nintendo halting production on some of its older games, such as Donkey Kong, and reassuring retailers that they had secured an additional supply of chips, no Zelda 2 or Super Mario Bros. 2 had shown up. As the Christmas season drew closer, retailers were not having their video game orders met from Nintendo. They began to worry. Many of these toy stores depended on the Christmas season for survival. They needed Mario. They needed Zelda. October came and went, and no sign of Zelda 2. Retailers became furious at Nintendo, accusing them of holding back stock on purpose to drive up demand, much like what Coleco did with the Cabbage Patch Kids a few years earlier.
Creating a shortage of this kind was nobody's design, and it's just one of those combinations of demand that far exceeded our most optimistic projections and an inability on the chip supplier to fulfill it.
Finally, in December, Zelda 2 was released, but your likelihood of getting a copy was nearly impossible. Parents would line up early, before stores would open, in hopes of getting a copy of Zelda 2 or Super Mario 2.
You came 1,000 miles just for this game?
Yeah. I've done 7 stores a day for 3 weeks now.
You couldn't check online if a store had Zelda 2 in 1988 because no stores were online. You could call a store if you dredged through the giant yellow pages to find their phone number, but calling wasn't always reliable, forcing parents on a store-to-store hunt. Pre-sales and Ultimate Editions didn't exist either in 1988. The Nintendo Fun Club newsletter and later Nintendo Power magazine was their form of pre-sale. That's why they continued to feature Zelda 2 again and again, even while it wasn't even out. With millions of subscribers, Nintendo had a direct line to their customers to keep them hyped about the Adventure of Link. Just like you can subscribe to this YouTube channel to keep yourself hyped about my future videos. There was a Zelda 2 commercial that hit in 1988 to coincide with the game's release, aimed at kids while they watched their favorite cartoons.
Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power.
As the holidays for 1988 came and went, many kids, me included, didn't get The Adventure of Link or Super Mario Bros. 2. The chip shortage carried on into 1989, slowly letting up as the year went on. Many kids would have to wait months, or worse, the following holiday season, before getting their hands on the next Zelda or Mario sequel. The reviews for The Adventure of Link were generally good. Nintendo Power said the game was an entertaining and natural step in the franchise's evolution, even giving the game its Game of the Year award for 1988. Dragon Magazine overall enjoyed the game, but thought the first game was better. Electronic Gaming Monthly ranked Zelda 2 as number 72 on their 100 Best Games of All Time list in 1997. In the end, Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link would sell over 4 million copies, becoming the 8th best-selling game on the NES. It may have been 2 million less than the first game, but these are still excellent numbers. An NES game only had to sell 500,000 copies to be considered a hit. With numerous delays for The Adventure of Link enabled games like Rambo to come out first, and Rambo played a lot like Link, and made some of Link's more unique gameplay aspects less unique when it came out, because it looked like Rambo did it first. By leaning more heavily into the action rather than the RPG elements, Zelda 2 may have been the smarter move on Miyamoto's part, as the US tended to lean more towards action games than the slower-paced RPGs. Final Fantasy was a hit with 500,000 copies sold, but the abysmal failure of Dragon Quest, retitled Dragon Warrior for the US, proved that RPGs would face a rough future in the US. But don't worry, they'd have their moment one day. Though the Zelda series would not continue in the same style of Zelda 2, Nintendo would one day try to make a sequel to the sequel.
Link's Adventure, if we were to just bring it out again, it wouldn't be enough fun. It's a little rough around the edges, isn't it? The disc system had certain limitations, and if we were using the cartridge format, it would have been better. You know, the American version is improved. It would be great if we were to give the American version of Link's Adventure to Japan, but even among our staff, they love Link's Adventure. They're always saying, let's do it on GameCube, but I don't know, not yet. Shigeru Miyamoto.
Despite Shigeru Miyamoto's disappointment in Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, it seems the other devs at Nintendo convinced him to attempt a sequel to the sequel. Information about this cancelled game is sparse and conflicting, but what we do know is that sometime after the Game Boy release of Link's Awakening, Shigeru Miyamoto and longtime Nintendo veteran Yoshiaki Koizumi began work on a new Adventure of Link game for the Super Nintendo. Not sure if it was to be a reboot or a remake. The idea was for a revamped battle system using Chambara-style action. Chambara, or sword-fighting films, are part of the samurai cinema genre. Koizumi, a big fan of Zelda 2, was experimenting with a thin polygon Link model using the power of the Super FX chip that allowed SNES games to render 3D polygons. Very blocky 3D, but still 3D. The infamous GigaLeaks from Nintendo revealed a file titled Koizumi, dated July 27, 1994. From this, we can deduce that Nintendo probably worked on this game for about a year. Whether it was a sequel, a remake, or a reboot is unknown. Possible they didn't get that far enough along in development to figure out what the story of the game would have been. Also discovered in the leaks were files titled Link by a modder named Starkson. Having experience with the Super FX chip, Starkson was able to build a model of Link from the files using the Star Fox engine. Starkson said in a Did You Know Gaming episode that these models seem to be very early models in the process. Clearly, Link looks really blocky, and this is probably not what he would have looked like in the final version of the game, if the game had ever come out. The project was eventually cancelled to finish Star Fox. One good thing to come out of all this, though, was that the Chambara-style action would carry on into Ocarina of Time. With the SNES Adventure of Link dead, it would be 2 console generations before Zelda 2 would appear again on a Nintendo console. In 2003, to promote the upcoming Zelda game The Wind Waker, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition for the GameCube. It included Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, and 3 other classic Zelda games. The Zelda 2 Collector's Edition is based on the NES version of the game. They made some slight grammar touch-ups, changing the abbreviated number 3 Triforce in the opening title crawl to 3rd Triforce. Also, they added the pause word, so when you pause the game, you know for sure you paused the game. I'm not going to show this next change because I don't want to put anyone at risk. In the original, when you died, there were rapid flashing lights. The Collector's Edition removed the lights because they could cause seizures in some players. Nintendo received a lot of criticism around this time for their games containing flashing lights. As the world realized photosensitive epilepsy was indeed real, Nintendo went to great lengths to remove flickering and flashing lights from all their games. Most of the Zelda 2 re-releases on Nintendo consoles throughout the years would follow the NES version. I'd like to point out something about the Game Boy Advance version of The Adventure of Link. On the Overworld map, the Link sprite model is larger than that of the console version. This is so you can see Link better on the small screen of the GBA. The Japanese version, though, would hold many of the features present in the Famicom Disk System version, such as the level progression and the character designs, minus the dreaded load times. Oh no, wait. They are still there. Yes, even on the Japanese version of the Switch. And let's not forget the NES Remix and the Nintendo World Championships. which takes select levels from Zelda 2, along with other famous Nintendo games, and changes up the levels into new mini-games and challenges for you to get high scores. And with that, let's move into the final chapter and bring this history to an end.
On the other hand, I think finishing The Adventure of Link was somehow serious. It's the game in which we've improvised the most on the spot, and it wasn't reflected quite naturally. We did all we could within the technical limits of the time. That's the most, well, that game had a different approach as an excuse. I'll say the disk system's capacity was at its limit. The one with the most reflection material is The Adventure of Link. Shigeru Miyamoto.
Plus, it wouldn't be long after Super Mario Bros. 3 that Nintendo's next-generation console would be on the horizon, where the original Zelda team would be reunited once again to make an all-new Zelda for the next generation in gaming. Sadly, Zelda 2 would be the last Zelda game co-director Tadashi Sugiyama would ever be directly involved with, except for a few supervisor credits and special thanks. But I wouldn't feel too bad for Sugiyama, as he would go on to co-create another gigantic Nintendo franchise. Super Mario Kart. As for Zelda 2's other director, Yasuhisa Yamamura, he would continue into the next Zelda game, A Link to the Past, as an assistant director. As the years have passed, Zelda 2 has proven very divisive across the fandom. Some claim it downright sucks, but just as many others will praise it. Some even claim it's the best Zelda game in the series. There's also those who appreciate the game for what it is, and the unique things it brought to the series. The conversation as to how good or bad it is will continue, like a story as old as time. Is it the black sheep of the series, or a masterpiece? These questions will only magnify The Adventure of Link into its own legend and infamy. But possibly Zelda 2's biggest impact is on other game makers. Look at Fax Xanadu or Moon Crystal. DuckTales on the NES expands the downthrust of Zelda 2, and the director of Battle of Olympus outright said The Adventure of Link was his inspiration, with countless other games paying homage in admiration for Zelda 2. The Zelda that never quite was. Shigeru Miyamoto may see Zelda 2 as a failure, but he also saw Zelda 1's system as inadequate. He had so many ideas that got left on the cutting room floor for both Zelda 1 and 2. Miyamoto was bold in taking Zelda 2 in a new direction, but in reflecting on what worked and what didn't, I think he learned more of what a Zelda game truly is. Though the role-playing elements of Zelda 2 would not continue, there are many other elements from The Adventure of Link that did. For we learn more from our mistakes than from our victories.